While I was strapped to a ventilator in the ICU, ribs, shattered skin, stitched every breath forced through plastic tubes, my own mother leaned over me and whispered that the crash had gone perfectly. She said it like she was proud, like the twisted steel and blood on the highway were nothing more than a plan finally working. My stepfather's shadow loomed behind her, his hand brushing the plug of the machine that kept me alive. "One pull," he murmured, "and the money is ours." I heard every word. I could not move, could not scream, could not claw the mask from my face, but my eyes were wide open and my heart hammered so hard the monitor betrayed me. I was supposed to be dead already. That was their plan. They had waited until the night I drove home alone, timed it, followed me, and let his SUV slam into the back of my car until metal screamed and glass cut into my face. They thought fire or blood loss would finish me, but when sirens came and dragged my body from the wreck, I was still breathing barely enough to ruin their clean ending. Now, here in this white room of machines and antiseptic, they circled like vultures, furious that their prey still twitched. My mother's eyes held no grief. She leaned closer, perfume cutting through the plastic stink of oxygen, and said, "It worked. The money is ours now, you will never touch it again." I felt her hand press against my wrist, cold and deliberate, as if she was confirming that I still pulsed when she wished I would stop. My stepfather smiled a cruel thin line and whispered that accidents can be fixed. One tug on the cord, one slip of the machine, and even the doctors would call it natural. I tried to shake my head, but the straps held me down. Tears burned down my temples and disappeared into the pillow. They laughed at the sight. "Do you hear her heartbeat racing?" "Harold," my mother said. She knows, she is already gone." And he leaned over me, eyes close enough for me to smell the coffee on his breath, and answered, "Let her know, Diane. Let her know she will not wake up tomorrow." They left the room with heels clicking against tile like a countdown clock. I wanted to believe the crash had been random, that maybe the world was just cruel, but I remembered the license plate shattered into my memory before the glass tore across my cheek. His car. My stepfather's car. He had rammed me with his own hands, and my mother had smiled as if murder was just another family duty. My chest heaved against the mask. My mind screamed into silence, but the machines kept me tethered here, halfway between life and the grave they dug for me. They thought I was too weak to fight. They thought I would fade without a word. But I remembered, and as long as I remembered, they had not won. People like to say blood is thicker than water, but in my house, blood was a weapon. My mother, Diane, was 55 and wore cruelty like perfume invisible until you were choking on it. She raised me with the kind of love that kept score every meal, tallied every dollar she spent on me, twisted into a debt I was expected to repay. When I was a child, she told me I was lucky she had not left me in a basket on some stranger's porch, that she had ruined her body giving birth to me, that everything I owned belonged to her first. My father, the only person who had ever shielded me, died when I was 12, and within a year, Diane had married Harold. He was a man with hands too heavy and eyes too quick to narrow. At first, he pretended to be kind, bringing home gifts, but by the time I was 14, he had slapped me across the face for not folding his shirts properly. My protests never mattered. Diane always said the same thing. "You should be grateful someone took care of us." She meant herself, not me. When Lucas was born, my half-brother, the new family, was sealed. From the start, he was spoiled, coddled, excused. Every mistake swept aside, every whim indulged. I was the one told to clean, to babysit, to sacrifice. By the time I was old enough to leave, the pattern was carved into me like scars. Work harder, give more, expect nothing back. I threw myself into school, into jobs, into building something that belonged to me. I sold my small tech startup at 29, and for the first time in my life, I had money that was mine, $2 million wired into an account I had opened without my mother's name anywhere on it. That number should have been freedom. Instead, it became a death sentence. Diane found out within weeks. I never told her, but she always had ways of knowing. Maybe it was Lucas snooping, maybe Harold hired someone, or maybe Diane just had the sixth sense of a predator smelling blood. She came to my apartment uninvited, sat on my couch like she owned the air, and said it straight. "That money belongs to family. Without us, you would have starved. Without us, you would still be scrubbing floors." I told her it was mine, that I had worked for it, that every cent came from years of sleepless nights and debt and missed meals. She smiled like I was a child refusing to share a toy. She said I owed her my life and now it was time to pay. Harold backed her up with his low grunt. Family money, family rules. Lucas laughed in my face, asked when I was going to buy him a car. I threw them out that night. It was the first time I had ever raised my voice against them, the first time I believed I could stand alone. I thought shutting the door was enough. I thought locking the account was enough. But people like Diane do not let go. She called me dozens of times, left voicemails that slid from sweet to venomous. One said she loved me and wanted to reconcile. The next said if I did not share, she would make sure I regretted it. Harold's threats were less subtle. He showed up outside my building one night, leaning against his car, and muttered that accidents happened to girls who forgot where they came from. Lucas mocked me on social media, posting pictures of expensive things he claimed I should be buying for him. I ignored them or tried to convincing myself that if I stayed quiet, they would get bored. But silence only fed their hunger. They escalated. They followed me to work, cornered me in the parking lot, demanded my account information. Diane spat in my face when I refused, then smoothed my hair like nothing had happened. Gaslighting was her favorite trick. She would slap me, then say I had provoked her. She would steal from me, then claim she was only borrowing. When I told her no, she told everyone I was ungrateful, cold, selfish. People believed her. She had that charm, that practiced smile. But behind closed doors, she hissed that I would never escape, that every door I walked through she had built. The night of the crash, I caught the look in her eye when I left the house. She said, "Drive safe, Olivia," but her smirk told me she already knew I would not. She knew because Harold was waiting. They had been planning. The car that hit me did not come out of nowhere. It was his SUV, the same dent on the fender I had seen in my mother's driveway. They called it fate. I called it murder dressed in family clothes. That was the kind of family I had. A mother who raised me to believe love was a debt. A stepfather who thought bruises were discipline. A brother who thought my existence was his allowance. And all of them circling $2 million like vultures over a body not yet cold. The night of the crash is carved into me like glass under the skin. It was late, the kind of late when streets are empty and shadows stretch long under the orange wash of streetlights. I had stayed at work later than usual, finishing reports, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of numbers instead of the gnawing fear that my family was circling closer each day. My apartment was only 20 minutes from the office, and I told myself I would be fine. I drove the same road I always did, a narrow strip of asphalt that cut between warehouses and the river quiet, predictable. I checked my mirrors, hands tight on the wheel, a habit born from weeks of feeling watched. For a few miles, nothing happened. The radio hummed low, the hum of tires, a dull comfort. Then the headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, too bright, too close. My chest tightened. At first, I thought it was just an impatient driver, but the car matched my every move. I switched lanes. So did they. I slowed. They slowed. My pulse pounded louder than the engine. I recognized the shape even before the front grille filled the mirror. The SUV. The one Harold drove. The dent on the fender was a scar I had stared at in my mother's driveway 100 times. He was behind me, and he was not hiding. The distance closed fast. My fingers slipped on the wheel. I whispered, "No, no, no." But the sound died in the roar of tires. The first hit came like thunder. Metal shrieked. My body jolted forward, seatbelt cutting across my chest. I tried to steady, tried to brake, but the SUV slammed again, harder, pushing me faster, closer to the edge where the guardrail split. The world fractured into glass and spinning light. My car spun the river, a dark mouth below, and then the crash came steel against concrete glass, slicing skin, my head snapping back. I remember the sound more than the pain, a scream of twisted metal that drowned everything else. The airbag exploded, choking me with powder, and then silence broken only by the drip of blood against plastic. My body was trapped ribs, screaming lungs, shallow. I saw the SUV pause in the mirror, brake lights glowing red like eyes. For a second, I thought he would get out, maybe pretend it was an accident, but then the lights vanished. He drove away. He left me there, broken, meant to die. They thought the wreck would end me. They thought fire or blood loss would do their work for them. But sirens cut the night blue and red flashing against the twisted frame of my car. Paramedics pried me out, their voices sharp with urgency. She's still breathing. Barely. They loaded me into the ambulance tubes shoved into my throat, hands pressing my chest. I faded in and out, pain pulling me under, but somewhere in the haze, I heard one of them say she is lucky to be alive. I wanted to laugh, but the mask stole the sound. Luck had nothing to do with it. Stubbornness did. I refused to give them what they wanted. When I woke again, it was white light and the hiss of oxygen. ICU. Machines beeped steady rhythms. My body felt like lead, every limb heavy, every rib an echo of the crash. My mouth was sealed with plastic, my voice gone. But my mind was awake, too awake. That is when they came. Diane. First, perfume, thick heels clicking on the tile as if she were walking into a gala instead of a hospital room. Harold followed heavier, his boots grinding against the floor. They stood at the foot of my bed, not grieving, not relieved, but calculating. Diane's eyes scanned the monitors, then my face, then the purse the nurses had tucked away. She pulled it open, rifled through papers until she found the envelope. She wanted the one I had hidden with account details and trust documents. Her lips curled as she read. Harold stood closer, his gaze fixed on the ventilator. He traced the plug with 2 fingers, casual, almost curious, like a man inspecting a switch on a lamp. His voice was low, but I heard it every word carved into my chest. One tug, and no one asks questions. Diane leaned over me so close I could see the lines of age cutting her skin lines I once thought were from hard work, but now knew were carved by bitterness. "It worked," she whispered. "The accident worked. The money is ours now." I felt tears sting my eyes, but the straps held me still. She mistook my silence for surrender. She always had. Harold smiled, then a thin, cruel line, and muttered that if I stirred again, he would make sure I did not stir twice. They thought I was gone already. They thought I could not hear. They thought the crash had broken more than bone. But my mind was sharper than ever, and though I could not speak, I etched every sound into memory. Diane's cold triumph, Harold's whisper of murder. Even Lucas's absence spoke volumes. He did not need to be here. His role was played already distracting me, keeping me on edge, making sure I was where they wanted me when Harold struck. Together, they had written me off a casualty of an accident that would never be investigated deeply enough to trace. But fate was not on their side. I was alive. Bruised, battered, gasping for breath through plastic tubes, but alive. And alive meant witness. Alive meant resistance. The nurses did not see what I saw. To them, Diane was a grieving mother, Harold a worried husband. They played the roles well, tears on cue voices pitched with just enough panic. But the second the door shut, they dropped the mask. Diane's voice turned sharp, almost gleeful. "It is ours, Harold. She will not last the night." He nodded eyes on me like I was a carcass. They left me there to stew in silence, convinced that death was minutes away. What they did not realize was that silence is not weakness. Silence can be memory, and memory can be weapon. As I lay in that bed, breath tethered to machines, my body wrecked, I promised myself I would not let them win. They thought the crash was the end, but it was only the beginning. They had tried to erase me with steel and concrete, tried to finish me with a cord and a smile, but I was still here. And if I was here, they would face what they had done. The days blurred in the ICU hours counted by the steady beeping of monitors and the footsteps of nurses who drifted in and out, adjusting tubes, checking vitals, never realizing the danger standing in the room when Diane and Harold appeared. They came every day like clockwork, not to comfort, not to support, but to circle. My mother would sit in the chair beside my bed, her fingers curling around my wrist as if she were checking my pulse. But I knew she was calculating how much life still ran through me. She whispered in tones too low for the staff to catch things only I could hear. "You are a burden, Olivia. You are a mess we should have cleaned up years ago. You think money makes you powerful, but look at you now. Machines and pity. Without us, you are nothing. Harold never bothered with words of manipulation. His cruelty was blunt. He would lean on the ventilator, testing its wires, his thumb brushing the plug like a man practicing before a performance. Sometimes he pressed down just enough to make the machine stutter, my chest tightening until my vision blurred. Then he released it, smiling when the monitor screamed in alarm and the nurse rushed in. He always pretended it was accidental, feigning concern, asking questions about the equipment, playing the role of the worried stepfather. They never suspected him, never saw the malice dripping from his grin when their backs were turned. I wanted to scream that it was not an accident that the man touching the plug was the same one who rammed me off the road, but my voice was trapped behind plastic. All I could do was endure and remember. Lucas visited once, hands shoved in his pockets, his laugh cruel. He looked at me and muttered that I should not fight it, that dying would be easier for everyone. He wanted the money too, wanted the spoils of a life he had never worked for. I lay there and let his words sink in like knives, each one reminding me that blood did not mean family. They thought they had stripped me of power, but they underestimated what memory can do. Every insult, every whisper, every near tug of the cord I recorded in the silence of my mind, a record I would one day release. But fate has strange timing. Just when I thought I would drown in the helplessness of machines and betrayal, the door flew open, not with the careful push of a nurse, but with the force of a storm. The crash against the wall startled everyone. Diane snapped her head around. Harold stepped back from the ventilator, and I felt my heart race when I saw who had entered. Ethan, my half-brother from my father's side, the one Diane had spent years turning against me, the one who had disappeared from family gatherings after too many arguments with her venom. I had not seen him in months, maybe years, and yet here he was, standing in the doorway with fire in his eyes. He was not alone. Behind him strode Detective Harris' badge flashing as he crossed the threshold, flanked by two uniformed officers. Diane's face drained of color. Harold's fists clenched, his eyes darting toward the cord as if he could still end me before they reached him. But Ethan's voice cut through the sterile air. "Step away from her. Now!" Harold froze. Diane tried to recover her smile, returning like a mask. "Officers, there must be a mistake," she said, her voice syrupy sweet. "This is my daughter. We are here to support her." Harris did not pause. He pulled a folder from his coat, thick with documents, and dropped it onto the rolling tray beside my bed. "We have evidence of fraudulent withdrawals exceeding $2 million, signatures forged, authorization falsified, and video from the bank showing you both present." He turned to Harold. "And we have footage from a traffic camera showing your SUV colliding with her car moments before the crash." My pulse leapt the monitor, betraying my relief. Diane stammered words falling apart. Harold growled, muttering that it was a misunderstanding. Ethan ignored them. He came straight to my side, took my hand in his, and whispered, "You are safe now, Olivia. I am here." For the first time since the crash, my tears came not from fear, but from the weight of hope. The officers moved quickly, one reading rights, another stepping behind Harold to snap cold metal around his wrists. Harold fought, twisting, shouting that he was being set up, but the detective's voice drowned him. Diane shrieked, clutching at her chest, insisting it was family business, that I was delusional, that the money was hers by right. Ethan's grip tightened on my hand. He leaned close and whispered again, "They cannot hurt you anymore." Abigail, the young nurse who had been watching silently from the doorway, stepped forward, her face pale but determined. "I saw him," she said firmly. "I saw him touch the plug." Diane's head whipped toward her, venom in her eyes, but Harris only nodded. "Thank you, miss. Your statement will be added to the record." The room spun with chaos, but for once it was not mine. It was theirs. Diane sobbing, Harold, raging officers pulling them away, cameras flashing outside the hall where reporters had already gathered. I lay in the bed, broken but alive, watching the world tilt back toward justice. Ethan stayed beside me, his eyes never leaving mine. "You will get through this," he promised. "You are not alone anymore." And for the first time since the crash, I believed him. The hallway outside my ICU room erupted into chaos the moment the officers dragged Diane and Harold through the doors. Cameras flashed microphones, lunged forward. Voices collided in a storm of questions. Is it true you staged the crash? Did you steal from your daughter? Did you try to pull the plug? Diane tried to hide her face twisting away, but reporters pressed closer, their voices merciless. Harold snarled, muscles straining against the cuffs, his eyes darting toward me through the glass as if I had betrayed him rather than the other way around. I watched from the bed, my heart hammering every beep of the monitor, a reminder that for once I was not powerless. Ethan stood beside me like a shield, his jaw clenched, but his presence steady. He leaned closer and whispered that this was only the beginning, that the truth was finally out, and the world would see them for what they were. Detective Harris returned a moment later, flipping through documents, his tone calm, steady, factual. "We have everything we need," he assured me, though his eyes softened when he saw the tears streaking my temples. "You are the victim here, and you are safe now." I blinked hard, the only answer I could give, but he understood. The nurse Abigail entered again, holding a clipboard, her voice quiet but unwavering. "I will testify," she said. "I saw him reaching for the cord. I heard them whispering when they thought you were unconscious." Her words were daggers, not at me, but at the people who had tried to kill me. Diane screamed from the hall that she was lying, that everyone was against her, but no one listened. For once, her gaslighting did not work. The cameras did not care about her excuses. They wanted facts, and the facts were ugly. Within hours, the story hit every screen. Local news anchors spoke in tones of disbelief. National outlets picked it up before the night was over. Headlines screamed, "Elderly mother and stepfather attempt to murder daughter for $2 million." The footage from the bank was broadcast, showing Diane and Harold sitting side by side as they signed withdrawal slips, laughing casually as if they were not forging my future away. Screen captures of Harold's SUV near the crash site played on repeat. Even the audio clip Ethan had recorded Diane's chilling words. "It worked. The accident worked," echoed across the evening news. I lay in my hospital bed and watched the empire of manipulation crumble in real time. Diane's tears no longer fooled anyone. Harold's gruff denials sounded like desperation. Lucas, though not arrested, was pulled into the spotlight too. His smug social media posts about what he deserved, what I owed him, were dragged into daylight. He locked his accounts, but screenshots lived forever. Employers cut ties. Friends vanished. The family that had once thrived on reputation and control now drowned in public disgrace. Ethan updated me each morning, bringing newspapers reading aloud while I gripped his hand. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, identity theft. The charges stacked higher each day as investigators dug deeper. Cayman accounts connected to Diane, shell companies linked to Harold. Patterns of theft reaching back years, small amounts skimmed here and there, but the $2 million was too big to hide. The prosecutors moved swiftly, eager to make an example. Court dates were set before I even left the ICU. My recovery was slow, each breath an effort, each movement sharp with pain, but the fire inside me burned hotter than the broken bones. I wanted them to see me alive, wanted them to know their plan had failed. The press did not let the story fade. They camped outside the hospital waiting for statements. Ethan and Detective Harris shielded me, but eventually I agreed to one thing: the release of the footage. The public deserved to see. So one evening, the networks broadcast the grainy hospital security tape. It showed Harold's hand hovering over the ventilator cord. It showed Diane leaning over me, whispering words she thought no one else would hear. They added captions slow and clear. The nation gasped. There was no denying it anymore. Not even Diane could talk her way out of her own lips on camera. After that broadcast, her lawyer dropped her case. Harold's counsel tried to argue stress, tried to argue misunderstanding, but the recordings buried them both. My hospital room became a strange kind of stage. Flowers arrived from strangers, letters of support from people who had lived through toxic families of their own. Nurses paused at the door, hesitant, offering quiet words of solidarity. "You are not alone," one whispered. "You remind us we can survive." Their kindness was a balm, but it was also a mirror of the truth I had been running from for years. I had not just been betrayed. I had been raised inside betrayal, conditioned to accept cruelty as normal. Now the world was calling it what it was: abuse. attempted murder, greed. The mask had shattered, and I was no longer the only witness. The trial loomed. Diane appeared in court with her hair neat, her clothes pressed, trying to resurrect the image of the respectable mother. Harold glared beside her, his bulk restrained by the suit he wore like armor. But the jury saw through it. They saw the bank records, the traffic footage, the hospital video, heard Abigail's testimony, Ethan's words, the detective's steady recounting of evidence. They listened to me too, my voice still weak, but my memory sharp. I told them about the whispers, the threats, the way Harold tested the cord, the way Diane smiled when she said the accident worked. Every detail spilled into the courtroom. Every ounce of silence I had endured transformed into truth. Diane tried to interrupt, tried to claim I was confused, hallucinating, but the judge silenced her. Harold tried to snarl over the prosecutor, but the officers held him down. Lucas was called to the stand and collapsed under questioning, admitting he knew of the plan, though he claimed he never participated. His cowardice condemned him in the eyes of the public, even if the law did not cage him. The verdict came swift: guilty, fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, identity theft. The words rolled like thunder, final and unshakable. Diane collapsed in her chair, her sobs no longer performance but panic. Harold cursed veins straining as he was dragged away. They were sentenced to decades, not months, not years, but decades behind bars. They had stolen my childhood, bruised my body, tried to end my life. But now they had lost everything they thought mattered. Money gone, freedom gone, reputation obliterated. Lucas faded into obscurity, jobless, friendless, branded by association. The collapse was complete. And yet, as I watched them led away, I did not feel triumph alone. I felt release. They could no longer touch me. They could no longer twist my silence into their shield. Justice was not just a verdict. It was breath in my lungs that they could not steal. It was the hum of the ventilator still pumping when their hands had failed to silence it. It was life fragile, but mine continuing despite their plan. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters shouted, strangers applauded as if I had won a battle for them too. In a way, I had. This was bigger than $2 million. This was proof that even family could be held accountable, that betrayal could be dragged into light, that silence could scream louder than lies. When I returned to the hospital to finish my recovery, I felt lighter despite the weight of casts and scars. Ethan sat with me reading letters from people across the country. Survivors of abuse, victims of fraud, women who had been silenced by families that claimed love but delivered wounds. They thanked me for not dying. They thanked me for speaking, and I realized something. My story was no longer just mine. It was a warning. It was a weapon. It was a reminder that even the deepest betrayal cannot erase a voice that chooses to rise. The days after the verdict unfolded like a storm that refused to quiet. News outlets dissected every detail, replaying the footage of Diane and Harold in court, their faces captured mid-collapse as the gavel fell. Headlines screamed betrayal, and greed anchors spoke with tones of disbelief. Experts weighed in on the psychology of parents who could plot their own child's death. I lay in my hospital bed, watching it all, bandages tight around my ribs, bruises painted across my skin, and felt the world staring with me. Diane was no longer a mother in their eyes. She was a criminal, a conspirator, a woman who had chosen money over blood. Harold was no longer a stepfather. He was the man who rammed his daughter's car and nearly tore her from the world. Lucas, though not convicted, could not hide from the shadows. His name trended alongside theirs, every screenshot of his arrogance shared, until the internet condemned him too. Employers blacklisted him. Friends deleted his number. He drifted into irrelevance, and for the first time in his life, no one rushed to catch him. The family name became a curse, whispered in disgust, not respect. I should have felt satisfied watching them fall, but the truth was more complicated. Justice was heavy. It did not erase the nights I lay awake as a child, bruises hidden under sleeves, words of poison drilled into my ears. It did not erase the memory of steel crushing around me the moment I thought my life would end in flames, but it gave me something I had never had before: power. The power to speak without being silenced, the power to breathe without permission. Ethan visited every day, his presence a reminder that not all family was poison. He sat by my bed reading letters from strangers. Survivors of domestic abuse wrote that my story gave them courage to leave. Elderly women wrote that they felt seen for the first time in decades. One letter stayed with me. A woman my age wrote that her father had stolen her savings, claiming he needed it for family, and when she resisted, he called her ungrateful. She wrote that watching me stand in court reminded her that family could be wrong and that saying no was not betrayal. I cried as Ethan read it because for years I had believed my mother's voice louder than my own. Now the world echoed mine back at me. The hospital itself could not ignore what had happened under its roof. Administrators visited my room stiff in suits, apologizing for what the cameras had captured, promising investigations, reviews, reforms. They said no one should have been able to get that close to my life support unchecked. I listened silent, then blinked once. They left quickly, unsettled by the weight of my stare. I did not need their words. Their guilt was their own. My healing was mine. Abigail visited too. The young nurse stood at my bedside, hands folded, eyes steady. She told me she had been scared to speak at first, scared of losing her job, scared of standing against people who carried themselves like authority. But then, she saw me lying there helpless but still fighting, and she realized silence would be another betrayal. She said I had reminded her that doing the right thing was not optional. I wanted to thank her, but my throat still burned with weakness. Instead, I squeezed her hand, a faint pressure enough for her to understand. She smiled, tears pooling, and whispered that she would never forget me. Outside the hospital, the world spun with judgment. Diane's investment firm severed ties. Harold's name was scrubbed from community boards. Lucas's social media became a wasteland of ridicule. Neighbors avoided them. Old friends denied ever knowing them. They had tried to erase me, but instead erased themselves. I spent hours staring at the ceiling, replaying the words my mother had spoken. It worked. The accident worked. The money is ours now. The memory burned, but it also hardened me. They had mistaken money for worth silence for surrender. They had underestimated the one thing they could not kill: my will. When the doctors finally said I could be discharged, Ethan wheeled me out into the sun. Cameras snapped from a distance, flashes reflecting off the glass doors, but I lifted my chin. The bruises were still visible, the scars fresh, but I did not hide them. They were not shame. They were survival carved into flesh. Reporters shouted questions asking what I would do now, how I felt seeing my family sentenced. I did not answer with words. I simply raised my hand, the same hand my stepfather had tried to still, and let them see it tremble but remain raised. Ethan whispered that it was enough, and it was. In the weeks that followed, I began to reclaim more than my health. I opened the account again, the $2 million still intact, frozen by the trust Ethan and Linda, his family lawyer friend, had secured for me. It was mine, untouchable, protected by clauses my mother had never imagined I would be smart enough to arrange. But I knew money alone could not heal what they had tried to break. So I chose something greater. I created a fund in my name, not for them. Not for legacy, but for women like me. Women betrayed by blood, silenced by family, trapped in violence. I donated the first $500,000 myself, and applications poured in within weeks. Legal fees, shelters, counselors, each request a mirror of the life I had barely escaped. I read them all, tears falling, knowing my survival meant more than headlines. It meant change. Diane and Harold sat in prison cells while I sat in board meetings, signing papers, making decisions. They had wanted my silence. Instead, I built a megaphone. They had wanted my death. Instead, I built a life that outlived them. Each headline about the foundation was another nail in the coffin of their control. The community praised me. Survivors thanked me. My name was no longer tethered to theirs. It stood alone, and it stood strong. Healing did not come all at once. It came in fragments in the quiet hours when the house was still and I could hear my own breath without the hiss of machines. At first, every sound made me flinch: the slam of a car door outside my window, the hum of tires on wet pavement, each one dragging me back to that night on the road when steel and glass became weapons. But time softened the edges. And with each sunrise, I chose to remain, to continue to build. Ethan visited, often bringing small pieces of the past that reminded me I was more than their victim. A photo of our father holding me as a child, letters I had written in school, even an old toy that had survived moves and arguments. He told me that he had stayed away because Diane's venom had poisoned everything, but he had never stopped thinking of me. Now he was here and he would not leave again. His presence was proof that not all family betrayed. Some endured. Abigail came too, her smile steadier each time. She told me she had transferred to another ward but wanted to visit because seeing me survive reminded her why she had chosen nursing in the first place. She said courage was contagious, that my fight had sparked her own. I wanted to believe her, and slowly I did. Strangers wrote letters, each one a fragment of their own pain. They told me of mothers who drained their accounts, brothers who broke their bones, uncles who stole their homes. They told me that hearing my story gave them strength to speak, to fight, to leave. I cried reading them because for so long I had believed my silence protected me, but now I understood it only fed the monsters. Speaking was survival. Speaking was healing. The foundation grew quickly, faster than I had imagined. Women walked through its doors with bruises and shame, but left with resources and hope. Each face was a reminder that betrayal did not end us, it transformed us. I sat with them, listened to their stories, and realized healing was not only mine to claim, it was ours to share. I no longer felt alone. My scars were not just scars. They were bridges. Sometimes at night I thought of Diane. I thought of her perfume, her smile, the way she whispered the accident worked, as if she had won. I wondered if she thought of me behind bars, if she replayed the crash, if she regretted anything. But then I remembered the look in her eyes when the verdict was read. It was not remorse. It was fury at being caught. That memory freed me. I did not need her apology. I did not need her recognition. Her silence was her prison now. Mine was my freedom. Harold's face haunted me less. His violence had always been blunt, predictable. He had no mask to mourn. Lucas faded into nothing, his name a footnote in my story. The power they once had over me dissolved like dust in rain. What remained was mine. I filled my new home with small things that mattered. A plant by the window, a stack of books I never had time to read, a blanket soft against my shoulders. I learned to cook meals not from obligation, but from choice. I sat on the porch and listened to wind instead of footsteps. Each small act was rebellion against the life they had tried to chain me to. I was not their burden. I was not their victim. I was mine, wholly and finally. Healing was not about erasing what happened. It was about carrying it without letting it crush me. And so I carried it piece by piece until it no longer weighed me down but built me up. I began speaking publicly, first at the Women's Center, then at conferences, then in front of cameras. My voice trembled at first, but with each word it grew stronger. I told them that betrayal can come dressed as family, that silence is not loyalty, that survival is not shame. I told them justice is not always enough, but healing is possible. And when the rooms erupted in applause, I knew that what Diane and Harold had tried to kill had become something greater than they could ever touch. My story was not about money. It was not about crime. It was about breath, stubborn and unyielding, continuing even when the world tried to steal it. It was about choosing life when death seemed certain. It was about remembering that even in the darkest silence there is power waiting to be spoken. The final chapter of this story was not written in courtrooms or hospital beds, but in the quiet spaces I built for myself. Months after Diane and Harold were sentenced, after Lucas had disappeared into his own shame, I moved into a small house on the edge of town. It was not grand, not filled with reminders of wealth, but it was mine. The porch faced a line of trees that whispered with the wind, and every morning I sat with a cup of tea and let the sun touch my scars. Freedom felt like that. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady. The foundation flourished. Carla, the director of the Women's Center, became my partner in shaping programs that offered not just emergency aid, but long-term strength. Legal clinics, financial workshops, safe housing. We named scholarships after survivors who had rebuilt their lives. Each success felt like another stone laid in a road I wished had existed for me years ago. And yet, I was grateful it existed now for others, for those who still believed they were trapped. My name, once dragged through mud by Diane's lies, now stood in headlines beside words like resilience and courage. I was invited to speak on panels to share not just the pain, but the survival. Each time I stood at a podium, I remembered lying in that bed with Harold's hand, brushing the plug with Diane, whispering, "The accident worked, and I let the memory fuel me." They had tried to silence me, and now my voice reached further than they ever dreamed. Healing was not only mine anymore. It belonged to every woman who wrote me letters, to every man who admitted he too had been betrayed by blood, to every young person who decided to leave before it was too late. That was my legacy, not money, not vengeance, but the proof that we could transform even the cruelest betrayal into power. Sometimes I wondered if Diane thought of me in prison. Did she replay that night? Did she ever regret? Or did she cling to her bitterness as tightly as she once clutched my wrist? It did not matter. Her story was no longer mine to carry. Harold, too, was gone from my thoughts, his rage trapped behind concrete. Lucas tried once to contact me, sending a letter that claimed he was sorry that he had been manipulated, that he wanted forgiveness. I read it once, then burned it. Forgiveness was not owed. My peace did not depend on his redemption. My peace depended on me, and I had already chosen it. Ethan remained by my side, the brother who had returned when I needed him most. His loyalty was a reminder that family is not defined by blood, but by action. He came to foundation events, spoke about the importance of protecting one another, stood beside me when the cameras flashed. We rebuilt not just trust, but kinship. I was not alone anymore. On the anniversary of the crash, I visited the stretch of road where it happened. The guardrail was repaired, the skid marks long gone, the river quiet beneath the bridge. I stood there breathing deeply and realized I was no longer haunted. The road no longer held me. I held it. I walked back to my car, scars aching in the cool air, and drove away with steady hands. No panic, no fear, just movement forward. The final message of my story is simple but sharp. Betrayal does not have to end you. Silence does not have to bury you. Family is not defined by those who share your blood, but by those who honor your life. My mother and stepfather thought $2 million was worth more than my breath. They were wrong. My survival is worth more than all the money they ever craved, and now I live not for them, not against them, but for myself and for everyone who needs to hear this truth. If you have ever been silenced, remember that silence can become voice. If you have ever been betrayed, remember that betrayal can become strength. If you have ever been left for dead, remember that survival is its own form of justice. I am Olivia Dawson. I was supposed to be erased. Instead, I am here, breathing, speaking, building, reminding the world that no one, not even those who call themselves family, can steal the will to live. That is the legacy I leave, and it is stronger than any inheritance they could have taken.